Everyone. So let's talk about command systems a little bit. Basically, after this section, we'll kind of be leaving them behind. We'll be talking about the free market in a lot more detail. But before we do, I want to make sure that kind of I went over that the theory of the command system with you. In a client command or planned economy, it all starts with a central authority, which almost always is the government. And the government is going to be, number one, kind of owning the means of production. So that means that they own the resources, they own the businesses, and that they own, the factories. They kind of own, almost everything. There's very little private property in a command system. And then what the government does is they decide how much of everything is going to be produced. These are called quotas. So the government decides, based on the needs of their population or the desires of their population, they're going to decide, how much food to produce, how much clothing to produce, how many cars to produce, how many weapons to produce. And then the government is going to then tell those industries, they're going to give them quotas and say, you need to produce a certain amount. And then if they do a good job, if they meet their quota early or if they go over their quota, then they may get some sort of like kind of bonus, which may be like a monetary incentive, or it could just be that they receive kind of favor within the party system, within that government, and then they can maybe move up to a better, higher position. So that's kind of how the command system works, is that you have the government controls all the resources, the government decides what's going to be produced, and then the government then distributes that to the population. Now, sometimes they might use rationing, which means they just kind of tell people like, hey, every family is going to get a certain amount. Like if you want a car, you put your name on a waiting list, and then when your turn comes up, you get a new car. Or if you need a new refrigerator, you put your name on the refrigerator list, and when your name comes up, you get a new refrigerator. So that's kind of like, rationing. In some command economies, they may use markets to try to ration the things that they've produced so that they could like have government owned stores where they would have groceries or clothing or other things that people might want. And you might use money to buy those things. But again, the government is the one that is deciding what the quantity of everything's going to be, what's produced, and the government is setting the prices. So oftentimes that leads to kind of shortages and surpluses. And so, people might people might want more clothes than are being produced, and they might not want as much potatoes as is being produced. So there might be extra potatoes on the shelves and not enough clothes on the shelves. So you get those shortages and surpluses because the government is setting the prices, trying to distribute these things that have been produced. So the big problem with the command system is that it's that really lack of profit motivation. That the motivation in the command system is, sometimes it's you don't want to be punished for not meeting your quota, you don't want to get in trouble, or it's that you're trying to make the people above you happy, but you're not trying to make customers happy. And so there's a lack of innovation because there's no financial incentive to kind of create new things or come up with new ideas. And then there's a real lack of motivation on the part of the kind of people running the businesses to provide a quality product, because they really don't have to worry about competition. So there's a story from the Soviet Union about this nail factory, and the government came in and said you need to produce like a certain number of nails. So they made these like super tiny, almost useless little nails was all that they produced, because they could do those really fast, really easily, and they could save on resources. So like the manager of the factory got an award for producing producing more nails than the government asked for, even though the nails were basically useless. Now the next year the government came back and the government was like, no, we're not going to tell you how many nails to produce. We want a certain amount of nails. We want like 1,000,000 pounds of nails. And so what the factory started doing was they started making these giant 5-pound nails that were like the size of railroad spikes, but they weren't really useful to anyone. But again, they were able to produce them quickly because they were so big and heavy, they were able to meet their quota very fast. So it's that kind of lack of incentive on the part of the producers that's the real problem in the command system. Personally, I experienced this when in the 1990s, I was working, when I was in high school, I worked at a conference in San Diego, and there was a bunch of people there from Poland. And they were kind of like high ups in the Poland government, which was part of the Eastern Bloc, part of the Soviet Bloc. They had been a communist country until the early 1990s. So when they had come to this conference that I was at, they had only started moving away from communism like 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 years before they came to this conference I was at. And they still were dealing with massive shortages of things that people wanted in Poland. So these five people from the Polish government that were here at this conference that I was working at, one of my jobs was to kind of drive them around. Well, before they were flying back to Poland, I had to drive them to stores because they wanted to buy a bunch of stuff to fill up their suitcases. They had all bought an empty suitcase to fill up with stuff from America to bring home to Poland because they knew that that it was things that there were shortages of that they could sell for a lot of money there, right? So I remember taking them to like a fishing store so they could buy these like really high-end fishing reels. I remember taking them to another store because they wanted to buy Levi jeans. They didn't care what size they were because they were just going to resell them. So they bought a bunch of Levi jeans. And then the thing that I thought was really funny was they had me drive them to a liquor store so that they could load up on these big bottles of vodka to take back to Poland because there was a shortage of vodka, and they knew that they could sell it for a lot of money. Now, I thought that was funny because vodka comes from Russia, and you'd figure that if they'd have anything in Russia and Poland and the Eastern Bloc in abundance, it would have been vodka, but no. There was a shortage of it, so that they were stocking up on it here to bring back to sell once they had kind of were moving away from that command system. So anyways, the big problem with that command system, again, is incentives. The lack of incentives to create new products, to make good products, to make your customers happy. That lack of incentives is really what holds it back. Now, future sections, we're going to be looking more at the free market system. All right, see you guys in a minute.